What is going on, chess YouTube? So in today's video, I want to show you a crazy attacking game played in the Najdorf Sicilian between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen in the 2020 Carlsen Tour Finals. Alright, in the game, Hikaru opens 1e4, Magnus goes c5, the Sicilian defense. Then we have knight f3, and oddly enough, d6. Magnus mostly goes knight to c6 or e6 here, but instead d6 played today in this game. Now we have d4, c takes, knight f6 pressure, now pawn on e4, knight c3 defends, and then sure enough, the Najdorf with the move a6. Now here, Magnus is playing as black in this game, and he almost never plays the Najdorf. He thinks it's a very risky opening as black, as white has just so many dangerous options to play against it, but sure enough, in this game, he does play a6 for the Najdorf. Alright, now here, Hikaru, he plays f3, heading for the English attack, arguably the strongest and most dangerous line against the Najdorf Sicilian. Now we have e5, knight b3, bishop b6, so far so good, bishop b3, and bishop to e7. Now queen to d2, and this is the last chance for black to go h5, try to stop white's g4 advance, and sure enough here he does go h5. This is the modern way to play against the English attack as black in the Najdorf Sicilian. And again, the idea is you are slowing down that g4 advance from white. Of course, white's whole idea in this line, before black goes h5, is to go g4, g5, knocking back that knight on f6 and playing for a dangerous kingside attack. So, h5 on the board, stopping the advance, and here white does go for the main line. Here, knight to d5, jumping in with the knight, threatening knight takes e7, and now here, knight takes d5 is virtually forced. Now, real fast, in the lines where black does not go bishop e7, then bishop takes d5 is the right move. But here, with bishop e7 on the board, it turns out knight takes d5 is the right response. And the reasons are complicated, but that is just opening theory for you. Now, e takes d5, and then bishop f5. And now Hikaru does go bishop b2. That is the main line still. All right, now here we have a very large branching point. In this position, black has many different ways to proceed. You can go bishop h4, inserting the check on the king on e1, trying to force out g3, and then going back to e7. Beyond that, moves like a5 are good, gaining space on the queen side and also short castles. Now, in the game here, Magnus, he does go bishop h4, a very provocative move, forcing g3, and then he does retreat, bishop e7. So here, Magnus wasting an entire move, going bishop h4 and then back just to force out that weakening move g3. Now, the benefit of this move is if white does castle short castles, then he has all of these weaknesses on the light squares on the king side. Black can go bishop h3, h4, and so on, starting the king side attack, and overall, castling short would be a very dangerous option. So that is the idea behind that check on h4. Now, here, Hikaru, how does he want to proceed? Well, the most dangerous line is just going long castles here, and again, going for that attack on the king side. Instead, he can short castle, that is still playable, or as in the game, he can go knight to e5, jumping up with the knight, a very thematic move in the English attack. The point being, you are pressuring b7 immediately. You're also setting up ideas like knight to c4, intending knight b6. So overall, knight a5, a very powerful, flexible, multi-purpose move by Hikaru. All right, now, Magnus, how is he going to respond? Well, he has a few different options, but the strongest is just b6, immediately driving back that knight, and of course, defending that pawn on b7 where it can't be attacked on b6. So, for example, the main line goes b6, knight to c4, then knight d7, a5, and so on, and black's going to have a perfectly fine game. Instead here, he actually goes knight d7, and this turns out to be a little bit dubious. Here, Magnus is giving Hikaru the option of just taking on b7 right away. Knight takes b7 is perfectly playable. The idea being, if white takes on b7, black can go queen to b8, and there's no good way to defend that knight on b7. Therefore, knight to a5 is forced. Then black can swoop down with the queen, take that pawn on b2, and get counterplayed. Now, that line is very, very complicated. In the game, Hikaru decides not to go for it. He just goes a4, gaining space on the queen side, a perfectly fine move. And with this move, he is showing his intention to castle on the king side, as a4 plus long castles would not make a whole lot of sense in this sort of position. All right, now here, Magnus, he has many different options. He can defend that pawn on b7, going perhaps rook b8 or queen to b8. Instead here, he does go short castles, once again giving up that pawn on b7. And here Hikaru, again, he has the option of ignoring it, going perhaps short castles, knight c4, and so on. But here he simply cannot resist that pawn on b7, and he does take it. So knight takes b7 is the move. Then we have queen b8 as promised, knight to a5, as again, there is no good way to defend that knight on b7, so knight a5 is the move, and then queen takes b2. Now here, that queen is threatening queen takes c2, as both the queen and the bishop are targeting that pawn. Therefore, the best move here is simply rook to c1, defending that pawn as in the game. If you don't play that, let's say you short castles, then black goes queen takes c2 and gets an excellent position being up a pawn. So instead, rook to c1 played in the game. And of course, this move does commit white to castling on the king side or keeping his king in the center. Long castles is no longer an option in this game. Now, here, the strongest move for black is going to be bishop h3, cutting off the white king, keeping it stuck in the center for now. That is the entire idea of bishop h4 as played earlier in the game, weakening those light squares and setting up bishop h3 ideas. Now, instead of that move here, Magnus does go rook f to c8, piling up more pressure on that pawn on c2. Now, rook takes c2 is a very serious threat, but of course, Hikaru is going to have ways to deal with that threat, and here he finds a very strong move, a very strong response. Knight to c6, jumping up with the knight, blocking the rook's communication on the c file, and setting up threats like knight takes e7. Now, of course, that bishop on e7 is under attack. Where is it going to go? In the game, there are a few different options. For example, bishop f8 is playable, bishop f6 is playable, and so on. In the game, bishop f6 chosen by the GOAT Magnus Carlsen. Now we have the move c4, gaining space on the queen side and trying to get that queen side pawn majority mobile and rolling down the board. Always a good idea. Now here, Magnus, of course, the queens are, they can be traded here. Magnus has the option of going for an endgame with the move queen takes d2. He is a very good endgame player, as we all know, so that is certainly one option. Beyond that, you can go, say, queen to a3, defending the queen, or even rook a to b8, again, defending the queen on b2. In the game, he actually plays a little bit of a mistake. He goes queen to b7, and this move is a little bit dubious. It's just not very active. The queen could have stayed active on the queen side again. Rook b8, queen to a3, and so on. And again, trading on d2 is also very playable. But instead on b7, the queen is very passive. And here, Hikaru is going to start to pull away with the advantage. So he starts short castles, getting his king to safety before black can go bishop h3. Now we have rook to e8, potentially setting up e4 ideas. That is a very common tactical idea in these English attack lines of the Najdorf. And here Hikaru plays a very, very bold move. He goes g4. He literally castles his king and then goes g4, gaining space on the king side, trying to drive back that bishop. Again, very bold decision. All right, bishop g6 retreats the bishop. Then we have g5, again, driving back that bishop on the f6 square. All right, bishop d8 retreats the bishop. Then a5, locking down the queen side. Hikaru playing on all sides of the board here, going g4, g5, then a5, again, just trying to clamp down everything. All right, now here, rook to c8 for Magnus, getting his rook on the c file, trying to blockade the idea of c5 as soon as he can. Now bishop d3, offering the trade of those light squared bishops. How is Magnus going to respond? He goes knight to f8. The point being, if you trade bishops on g6, then knight takes g6, does recapture back, and black is doing excellent. Now, bishop e4 is the move, sliding up with the bishop. Queen d7 slides over the queen. Then we have king to h1, sliding over one square with the king, trying to get it a little bit safer. Now here, Magnus, he plays yet another slightly dubious idea. He goes h4, gaining more space on the king side, potentially trying to get his king side play going, but it turns out this pawn move just makes his pawn a little bit weaker. Instead, bishop f5 may have been a stronger response. Now here, h4 on the board. Hikaru responds queen d3, offering the queen trade. And here the best move for black is just bishop takes e4, finally trading those bishops. Instead here, Magnus, he does go queen to h3, jumping in with the queen. And this move is a little bit dubious once again. Now here, Hikaru, rook b1, gaining control of the b file. Now bishop h5, again, not the best idea for black. And here white has the option of just continuing with the plan of rook b1, going rook b7, piling up pressure on the 7th rank. And here Hikaru would have just a tremendous amount of pressure. He could go, say, rook a7, targeting a6 later if he wants to, and so on. And once that pawn falls, black will be in a lot of trouble. Now, instead of that, here Hikaru does go bishop b6. The point being, if black takes on b6, then rook takes b6 would be excellent for white. Once again, he would have pressure on a6. But of course, black does not have to trade on b6 immediately. Instead, Magnus finds a brilliant series of moves. First, he does trade on g5. Bishop takes g5 is the move. Then we have bishop f5 hitting the queen. And here, Magnus plays just a diabolical move. He plays the move bishop to g6. Of course, Hikaru, with the move bishop f5, was targeting the queen, and Magnus ignores the threat. He goes bishop g6, the point being, now the bishop is pinned. If you take the queen on h3, then the queen on d3 falls as well. And again, if you take on g6, then knight takes g6 would be perfectly fine for black. So Magnus pulling this out of his you-know-what at the last second. All right, bishop takes h3, then bishop takes d3. The queens do come flying off the board to those bishops. Then we have bishop takes c8, and then rook takes c8. All right, Hikaru, he is up the exchange. He is clearly better, but Magnus is fighting back. He is trying to find some weird resources. All right, now, bishop e3, sliding back with the bishop, offering the bishop trade. Another very sneaky move by Hikaru. The point being, if you take the bishop, then you relinquish, that's the right word, relinquish the defense of the square e7, meaning knight to e7 would fork the king and the rook. So real fast, if you take on e3, knight e7 hits the king and the rook. That is enough to win the game. So you can't do that. Instead here, bishop f6 play by Magnus, retreating the bishop, very solid. And now we have rook f to c1, sliding the rook over. The point being, you want to go c5. And very importantly here, with that bishop on d3, both these rooks are under attack. You cannot save both of them. Therefore, rook fc1, intending c5, makes a lot of sense. All right, now, in this position, of course, with only the one rook under attack, you do want to trade on b1 right away. Bishop takes b1 is the right move, and you don't have to be a very stable chess genius like Magnus Carlsen to find that move. But instead here, Magnus, he goes e4, marching down with the pawn. All right, now Hikaru, he punishes this mistake. Rook to b3, getting out of the attack by the bishop. What is Magnus doing? I don't know. All right, here, knight to g6. Another slightly dubious idea by the GOAT. Instead, knight d7 was the stronger move. And the point being that knight on d7 does control c5, discouraging the c5 advance. Now, knight g6 is playing a very similar idea to knight d7. The point being, you want to jump to e5 with the knight. And again, on g6 or d7, that knight would have access to e5. But again, the point of knight d7 is that it does control c5 as well. And here Hikaru, he simply goes f takes e4, trading the pawn. Then we have bishop takes e4, king g1, and then knight d5. Now here Hikaru, he misses a very simple way to increase the pressure. The right lead forward is knight takes e5, intending bishop takes, and then rook b6, piling up pressure on the pawn on a6. Instead, rook to b8 played in the game, offering the trade of rooks, but this turns out to be quite a bit weaker, and it does throw away most of white's advantage in this position. All right, now, Magnus, rook takes b8, then knight takes, then knight to f3 check, hitting the king on g1. The king has to move in the game. King to f2 played, then knight takes h2, then bishop f4, hits the knight, and then knight g4, getting the knight back into the game. All right, now, king to e2 is the move, bishop e5, offers the trade of bishops, and white does oblige. Bishop takes, then knight takes, and then king to e3. Hikaru marching his king down the board, and we have a very complicated endgame here. The point being, both sides have roughly even material. Of course, white is up the exchange. He has the extra rook versus the extra bishop of black, but black has those two extra pawns, actually a 3-pawn majority on the king side versus the 1-pawn majority on the queen side for white. It's going to be a very complicated double-edged endgame. All right, f5, advancing those pawns is Magnus. Now c5, getting those pawns rolling. Now d takes c5, and instead of rook takes c5, here Hikaru goes d6 immediately, pushing his pass pawn as soon as he can. All right, h3, then d7. Both sides going all out. Of course, black here has to defend that d8 square. Therefore, knight to f7 is the right move. That is the only square to defend. Now, knight takes a6. Now the alpha 0 a pawn is a pass pawn. That pawn can also march down the board. Now h2, the other alpha 0 pawn marching down. Now we have knight takes c5, and then h1 promotes to a queen, forcing the sacrifice of that rook on c1. Now, rook takes, bishop takes, then knight to e6 is the move. Bishop d5 hits the knight. Then we have d8, promotes to a queen, knight takes, and then knight takes. Now, it is a all-out battle between Magnus Carlsen's 2 pawns on the king side versus the 1 pawn on the queen side of Hikaru. Is one side going to pull away? Let's find out. King to f8, a6, king e7, hits the knight, knight b7, runs away. Now, very importantly, you cannot take that knight. If you go bishop takes b7, then after a takes b7, white, of course, would promote that pawn. There is no stopping that pawn. Therefore, you cannot take on b7 yet. Instead, g5 is the move. Now, king d4 hits the bishop. King to e6. Knight d8 hits the king. Then king d6, a7, bishop a8 blocks that pawn. Then knight to f7 hits that king on d6. Now, king to c7. Knight takes g5. The pawns are flying off the board, and it is heading for a draw. So, king to b6, king to e5, king takes a7, king takes f5, and here, Magnus, the last move of the game, or one of the last moves, bishop e4, very flashy. The point being, neither side has enough material to win. Therefore, the bishop is sacrificed. Knight takes e4, and here, with just one knight left on the board besides the kings, it is a forced draw. There is simply not enough material to win the game. Therefore, it is a draw on the spot. Wow, what a game between Hikaru and Magnus in the 2020 Chess 24, what is it called? Let's see here. The Carlsen Tour Finals. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button and check out this video right here where I have yet another amazing game played between Magnus and Hikaru. If you want to see more Magnus versus Hikaru action, check that video out, and I'll see you in the next video.